I can't beat Mr. Brian Isaacs, who was principal at about 29, 30. Much later in my years, I was afforded this opportunity. But since its establishment, South Peninsula High School has played a vital role in shaping young minds and fostering strong sporting culture. I myself, coming from Protea, and we all have our preference to houses, of which there are 3 others, Mimosa, Azalea, and Kendal. We thrive in providing our students with a balanced education. As we delve into the history of the school and its contribution to sport and some of its involvement in SACOS, know that our children disadvantaged backgrounds or disadvantaged areas, which include Mitchell's Plain, Grassy Park, Steenberg, Seawinds, Lotus River, Heathfield, Strandfontein, Retreat. Very few from the immediate area attend the school. Over the decades, the school has undergone significant changes, adapting and evolving the educational landscape which you see today. The A.G. de Villiers was a very rough patch of dry sand, or should I say dry sand with patches of grass, which was used for training. I also know that this was quite confusing, but Mimosa trained in Kendal House for the inter-house. Azalea used the current area which we are now housed in the hall. Protea used CLEOPHAS Road to train for athletics. And I think it was, who's the other one? Kendal used the field. So, not part of my journey, but that's part of the history of the school, where there were no fields at that time, but athletics was big, inter-house was big, sports was big. And so sports ranged from athletics to tennis to baseball to cricket, all of the areas which we have proudly produced either Western Province or South African athletes. Prior to the A.G. de Villiers field, the M.N. Murat field, which is on the opposite side of the road, and the F.A. Coker field, training took place in various areas of the school. And I remember sporting events taking place at venues such as William Herbert, Athlone Stadium, and if we were really lucky, we'd go to Greenpoint Stadium. The school's motto is still and will always be non ministrari sed ministrari, not to be served but to serve, which reflects the commitment to academic excellence, leadership, and sport at our school. South Peninsula High School has long been a hub for sports development. The school has actively promoted athletics, soccer, rugby, and other sports, providing students with opportunities to excel both academically and physically. The A.G. de Villiers field has been a central venue for sporting activities. And for those who don't know, the A.G. de Villiers is the one right next to the school, which is actually a field that we lease from the city of Cape Town. South Peninsula High School has been involved and has advocated and supported SACOS for years. The South African Council for Sport was a significant movement that sought to promote non-racial sport, a term which I came to be very familiar with at South Peninsula High School during the apartheid era. South Peninsula High played a role in supporting SACOS sports, ensuring that students had access to fair and inclusive sporting opportunities. And through its commitment to equal access to sport, the school contributed to the broader mission of SACOS, which aimed to dismantle racial barriers in South African athletics. Many students and alumni of South Peninsula School have gone on to participate in regional and national sporting events, carrying forward the legacy of non-racial sport development. South Peninsula High stands as a beacon of education, sportsmanship, and social progress. From its humble beginnings in 1950, its continued impact on sports and education, the school remains a vital institution in the southern suburbs. Its contribution to sport and SACOS sports reflects the dedication to fairness and inclusivity, a term which we're now beginning to use again, and excellence. And as we celebrate its legacy, we recognize the importance of education and sports in shaping our future generations. Thank you. Allow me to take the opportunity to introduce a friend, a former colleague, an editor, and our author of today who holds very close relations with South Peninsula High School, a place he often calls home or refers to as home, and whose parents, Mona and Ronald CLEOPHAS, were ex-students of the school. He's a social scientist whose focus field is cultural history and an emphasis on sport. He's a senior lecturer at the Department of Sports, and it is my proud opportunity to introduce to you Dr. Francois CLEOPHAS. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. So I don't want to be talking much long. I just want to go through my PowerPoint that I have. So, and I do apologize. I didn't expect this, so I've got some dark fonts. So can we go to the next slide, please? Next one. Next slide. So just before I go further, I'm lecturing at the university since 2011 now, and I'm teaching since 1989. And over this time, I met a lot of people that have supported me, and I also supported. And I just briefly want to mention, these are the names that I could think of. I do apologize, there might be one or two names that I might have skipped. But these are names of people that I really want to thank for the support they have given me over this time. Next one. So, Mrs. Meiberg mentioned. Oh, okay. Mrs. Meiberg said that, you know, when I come here to the school, it feels like I'm part of the school. So I want to thank those people up there. That first picture there was when it was my last day at the school. And out of the blue on the morning, the principal asked me to come and say something. I can't remember what I said. But those people up there, Mr. Baker, Mrs. Meiberg, and the ex-principal of the school, Isaacs, they have influenced me and shaped me in the way I think about schooling. Next one. And also here today, amongst us here, these are my pride that I have. My PhD and master's students. And when I talk to them and when I work with them, I bring my own background into the process, and my own background I got were experiences that I picked up from the South African Council on Sport, SAST. I still see the world of sport today through the lens of the past. But I also know we're living in an age of 2025 where we can't go back to what SAST was. We have to find alternative ways of looking at things today. But I am still influenced and deeply affected by the South African Council on Sport. And at the bottom there, with Vanessa and myself, is somebody that has influenced me personally deeply. It's Mr. Frank van der Horst. Next one. Oh, okay, sorry. Sorry. So, in the publication today, this man over here, Ron Eland, there's going to be quite a bit said about him. He comes from an organization called TEPA. I come from an organization called the Teachers League. But I've learned over years, to make your story heard, you need to give voice and listen to people who differs from you. And I have a lot of respect for him. He's the first black person from this country representing a country at the Olympic Games. He was denied representing this country, and then he found his way to Britain, and he managed to get into the British Olympic team. And as Myberg mentioned in a talk, Batchwood, he became a school teacher there. And when he was at that school, and I'm going to talk about it just now, he met my mom. And my mom got interested in something that was called physical culture. And that is where my love and my feeling for this field of study comes from. But Ron Eland also was influential in shaping the history of this man here. He's still alive. David Isaacs, one of the South Africans who managed to reach an international platform despite the limitations of apartheid through the SAST platforms. And he competed against this famous man here next to Arnold Schwarzenegger. And his story is taken up in my second book, which will be on sale when we are done here. And then lastly, I want to thank these people here, sitting here. There's some of them here. Working with them over the past year and a half, 2 years, a lot of reflection of what we had in the past, a lot of reflection on how we were sold out, a lot of reflection on how things could have been different. So to those people, I don't have enough time here. I want to say thank you. You supported me, and I also support you guys. Okay. So the personal is always political. Everybody sitting here has got a mother and a father, and your mother and your father's life influences what you are today. So this is my mother over there. This is my father over there. They taught at schools, and they were both physical education teachers, a subject that we don't have anymore in the schools. One of the mistakes that the post-apartheid government made was to remove that from the schools. But through them, I developed a love for physical education and for physical culture. So in 1987, I finished at the University of the Western Cape with a BA in human movement sciences. I think there's quite a number of these people here, sitting here, that is busy following us. This school produced people like Bradley Millward, Trevor Johnson. So my love for the subject comes through what my parents taught me. So in 1951, so my mother and my father came to this school, and they were in Kendal House, And this famous person here, Richard Reeve, was in charge of the house. And when my mother was at the school, years later, she would tell me about Mr. George, Aussie George, who taught them softball. Now, softball in the 1950s amongst our people was a very, very rare thing. Mr. Aussie George came from Fort Hare, where he probably met up with people like Dennis Rutus that taught him softball. And I have written a piece on the formation of the South African Amateur Baseball and Softball Federation. The copy is over there. So I've left a number of copies of work that was done in our department on sports history. People are more than welcome to take one when they are done. So from that, I have published two books. The stories of the people that I have spoken about are in those two books, and they will be on sale when we are done. But this school's history really runs like a golden thread. I don't want to say much, but some of those pictures over there are people who were ex-pupils, and people also linked to this school. So the book that I'm launching today is not for sale because it is too expensive. Okay, so it is not for sale. But the book that I had is basically, it's a summary of 30 years of phys ed that I have. And looking back, it helped me see how actually cruel human beings are. We are the only living species who have developed things such as muscular Christianity, eugenics, and social Darwinism. Things that we grow up to call people black people, white people, Indian people. We are the only living species that actually does things like that. The book also gives an in-depth history of physical culture. Of course, it is not complete. A history of physical culture doesn't have a starting point and a point that is done. Okay, it evolves over time. If there are people who's interested in purchasing the book, you can speak to me afterwards, and I will help you. So future work that is coming from our department, and my line manager is here, so just to tell her. So the future work that I want to do is cricket in Cape Society, a history of the St. Augustine Club, and that club also has a very close connection with this school. For a short time, the club used the school's field as its base. And those two further works will be work that will be coming out from my pen shortly. So, what is needed for us to take the subject forward on the module is that people in positions of power at the universities, in public life, need to accept that any module of study or any course of work is incomplete if you don't have a historical base. If you don't know where you come from, if you don't know what happened in the past, you can't plan what you are doing now. We need more postdocs, and I hope there's maybe 1 or 2 here sitting here. We need more masters, PhD students. My one PhD student that was here, she came to the first book launch. So we're hoping that from here, when we are done, on Monday or so, somebody is going to give me a call at work, a phone call at work. They want to come do a PhD. And we need to have a bigger academic interest in the subject sport history. At the moment, there's only one university on the African continent that has got sport history as an independent module, Stellenbosch. We're hoping that will also change. So Professor Karen Wellman is here. I would like to hand her a copy of the book. And just to say thank you to her also for the support that she has given me and the subject of sport history. You will hear some more from her later on. Thank you. Thank you. And to the many people sitting here, all of you, I can't mention you all by personal name. Thank you for the support that you have for my work. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor CLEOPHAS. Francois and I go back a long way. So his parents taught in the suburb of Grassy Park for a while, especially his father was there for a long time. And his mother was my teacher in primary school for a term, only one term. So you can see I didn't turn out to be a big sport hero. She had little time with me. Anyway, I just want to take this opportunity to Francois to congratulate you on this publication. His work has always been to lift out stories that were not told, stories from the margins, and stories we would never have heard if he didn't make that part of his scholarship. So thank you for that. And this book is his first sole-authored monograph, Physical Education and Physical Culture, which covers quite a broad range of topics. And also congratulations to him because it's from a highly reputable international publisher, Palgrave Macmillan. And it's not easy to get proposals through a company like that. So well done and congratulations on that as well. Okay, so Francois wants the book and all the peripheral issues around the book to be foregrounded. He doesn't want himself in the center of things as he normally is. But Francois, we have to congratulate you on a very, this is a auspicious day to launch a book of this caliber. So well done. I think we need to give Francois a little round of applause. Thank you. So I'm going to call on our next speaker. It's Dr. Marcia Liner CLEOPHAS. She heads up the disability unit at Stellenbosch University. And for all I know her over the years as a colleague, and for all her efforts and input, she received an award from the Higher Education Disability Services Association for her contribution to disability in higher education. Well done on that. And without further ado, I'm going to call you up to do your input. You come in here. You want this? The clicker? Yeah. Is your thing up? Yeah. Is that yours?
Yeah. So thanks so much, Prof. Reddy. Is this the right mic? I see there are a few going around. Yes, we have known each other for a long time. I realize how long I've been at the university. Sure, people move on and it seems to me I got stuck. But nevertheless, I'm privileged to have been invited by Prof. Francois CLEOPHAS to just say a little bit about my uncle. Now, I'm not the historian, I'm not that professor, the academic and all of that, so my role here today is really just to speak about the person, you know, the uncle that we knew, and Francois reminded me not to forget to speak about my dad as well. So they all come from that era, you know, the 1940s, 50s, 30s maybe even. I'm not the historian, so please don't quote me on dates. But, you know, essentially during a time when we were living in apartheid, you know, we were on the margins, we were disenfranchised, there was so much that we had to offer, that we could give, you know, just of ourselves, of our bodies, in terms of occupations, employment, a whole lot of things, and so much was really denied because of that rotten system. Nevertheless, you know, as we've heard about Ron Eland this morning, for example, he was one of the people who really excelled and broke through the barriers. And we look forward to your book, Francois, that will speak a little bit more, you know, into that and about him as a person. He was an uncle who was very dear to us, and you know, kept in touch with us all the time through all his endeavors and everything that he did. And you see the title of my presentation, Shake the Hand That Shook the World. That we heard from him often. You know, he would come, he would visit, and that's what we heard. That is how he greeted us. And in many ways, he was the hand that shook the world through the activities and his pursuits that he took part in. So you're probably wondering about, well, who am I? You know, that CLEOPHAS. We're hearing a lot of CLEOPHASes this morning, and it's by absolute chance that I got that surname, you know, through marrying my husband, who's sitting right over there, who happens to be Andre Francois CLEOPHAS. So I don't know what's happening in the world beyond us, but there are things that are happening out there, and just all these coincidences that have, so there's no blood connection, but here I am, landed up at university, you know, and really, if I move on, so my mom was married to Christelina, and he was the other person that I'm going to speak about, but my mom's sister, Cynthia Eland, she was married to Ron, so that's the connection there. They got married, and for some, I don't get the story. I've been trying to fish for the story, but again, I'm not a historian. Maybe Francois can do that, but you know how they all met. But they grew up in that world of bodybuilding, weightlifting. So my dad was the bodybuilder, and Uncle Ron was the weightlifter. And so they married these sisters, and as you can see, I married Andre Francois CLEOPHAS, and then the rest is history. So I just want to also say that many years ago, well, not that long ago, maybe, 10 years or whatever, my aunt, who's, you know, they've settled in Canada now, Ron Eland and his family, she called me one day and said, there is this Francois CLEOPHAS that's been asking about your uncle, Ron Eland, and he's at Stellenbosch University, you know, and I was like, I'm sure she had the facts wrong. I didn't know Francois at the time. I, of course, went on to our address list, and there I found this Francois CLEOPHAS, sports historian at the sports department at Stellenbosch, and well, then the rest is history. I called him up, and yes, he was indeed the one, you know, snooping around like historians do. I think he was in Toronto at the time also, and, you know, just asking about. And so that then started our journey. Of course, I was more excited about the fact that he had this CLEOPHAS, that we had the CLEOPHAS in common as well. So, you know, there was a whole discussion, you know, with my husband Andre, and they also got their roots connected. So there's this parallel story that's really happening, you know, on both sides. So I'm going to, this is not a serious sort of discussion, this is just about the person behind, you know, the pictures that we see and the books that that's on display for sale. And I've also looked at this book. So the first chapter of this particular book has sort of a snapshot view into, well, not even just a snapshot, more than a snapshot, because it gives dates and all kinds of things that I did not even know of, you know. So remember, you have got an uncle, we're not as kids, which is what we were, you know, not really invested in these things. And I think my uncle was also a very humble person, just like my father was, you know. We've got trophies at home, like cabinets of trophies, and I can't even tell you, you know, when, what was achieved and names. So it was just like another thing in the house. So very humble people, very humble beginnings, but actually achieved so much. So Uncle Ron, you know, as I've got to know him, was also a very playful, adventurous person, you know, fun-loving. That is his wife. Cynthia, of course, sporty, and also a champion in a whole lot of ways as well. So one of the things that he did achieve in terms of South African acknowledgement was that in 2007 he was posthumously also, what do they say, inducted into the Sports Hall of Fame in South Africa, and that was after he had passed away. So that was some accolade that he got there. You will hear and you'll read about that in this book, and I'm sure in the next book about Ron Eland, you know, about him making it to I think it was the Commonwealth Games as well as the Olympics, you know. And you'll hear a little bit more about that also from Francois. So we've heard a lot about the physical culture, physical education. That is sort of what the sport area was called then. And yes, Francois, you're right when you say that, you know, having dropped PT, we called it PT in our day, you know, being dropped from the education system was, you know, quite a short-sighted view on this. However, Uncle Ron got very involved he was an educator as well, you know, very involved in his physical education, also with females, kids, and so on. Was also involved in there was what they called the cripple home, if I remember the words correctly. I mean, cripple is obviously not the politically correct term these days, but a home in Maitland where he was also involved with the kids there doing his physical education stuff. And then, you know, like I mentioned before, he was that person who maintained the contact with the motherland, you know, always coming home, not forgetting his roots at all. He was born in Port Elizabeth and, you know, maintained the family roots there, and also his friendships, of which one was the Fleers, but we also heard about the Oppermans, and, you know, there were always people when he came home that he had to visit. So these are sort of names that just resonate with us. So very recently, actually this year, in March, I think it was, his grandchildren visited. And not for the first time, they were here last year as well. So these are his, they all of course born Canadian, but they consider themselves Canadian, South African, and they love this country. So very strong roots still remain, and I think part of his legend, or his, you know, what he really instilled in his children, and now the grandchildren's really to, you know, to stay in touch with your roots and your motherland. So it was quite fun having his, having my cousin's children, and I think Francois also got to meet them. That's my mom on the right, or left, your left, in red, and then Auntie Cynthia, who is the late wife of Ron Eland, and she passed away actually while those cousins that I just showed you now and their children were here in South Africa, actually on a Sunday in April in Wynberg. We were having a family gathering that Sunday afternoon, and Wynberg was the place where actually my aunt and Uncle Ron, all, you know, they grew up in that area, my mom as well. And yeah, she passed away on that day in April, and that's the other sister. So they were actually three sisters, and the sister on your right, extreme right, is actually still alive, and she's early 90s. And that was the funeral that actually took place in April. Again, the connector, the family man, always around, enjoying a laugh and a kreef and a whiskey. My cousins, and it's actually so nice to see that, you know, and how he really engendered and fostered that, you know, connecting with each other all the time. So it feels like we're not actually apart, because and now we're even more connected, you know, given WhatsApps and SMS and video calls and all of that. And so this picture is to me just so typically, you know, shows that sort of that image of, connecting. And I call this is the one that got me to get the title of this this presentation, which is Shake the Hand That Shook the World. So in so many ways, he really did break barriers despite the politics of the day. So a little bit about my dad. So he was into bodybuilding as opposed to weightlifting like my Uncle Ron Eland was. And he also achieved his accolades. He did not go abroad, so he stayed, in South Africa, was Mr. Most Muscular in Mr. South Africa for a couple of years. I meant to change 1968. It's 1957, 1956, 1957, 1958. So sorry about that. So that was him, all muscular. I don't know who of us inherited the muscles, though, but that's the story for another day. And I mentioned the trophies, so many trophies, and so many accolades that he did have, which you will see the proof is still there. And then beauty pageants, and I think Francois also mentions that, I think it's not sure if it's this book or the article that was written, but he mentions the fact that often bodybuilders went into beauty pageants. It kind of went together. So that happened quite a bit. My dad also played rugby, by the way. He went more into entrepreneurial activities. I had the Christie's Coffee Bar, which we often nickname as the first mug and bean of the day. So we took going back to the 80s, I think it was. And then he later on had what he called the Liners Health Studio. This is all in Belleville South, which is where we grew up. And so he had the first Health and Racket as well, precursor to the Health and Racket. And that is my brother also, attempting to follow in Daddy's footsteps. And so, yes, just in conclusion, Uncle Ron and Francois, you've got that big black bag. I still see that big black bag right away. He's so after his big black bag of... My uncle wrote everything down. As opposed to my dad, who was not that archivist or that writer, but my uncle was really a natural archivist, wrote very well and wrote very neatly, I must say, as well. So this just sort of a little bit of his writing, but there's lots of it. And I think that also makes it easier for this great historian to piece together, the stories and the events and all of that. So we look forward to the book on Uncle Ron. So just in closing, also to say that sports historians are so vital. It's actually so sad to hear that there is just one department on the continent that has sports history as one of the sort of modules. So we hope that will, improve, because I think it's so important, that we have people like sports historians snooping around, especially bringing out the people that were not recognized in this country. They also help us to remember, so to put together parts that were, lost and finding them. And then, of course, especially in South Africa, I think that is so important that we do that. And so that we also don't repeat our histories. And we say that all the time, and yet sometimes we look back and we go like, wow, what's actually happening here? If one just looks globally at what's happening in the world, some of it looks so familiar. But I think it's important that we treasure that and that we remember and that we reflect. And that's the end of my few minutes. Thank you so much. And Francois, we look forward to your book, next book. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Liner Cleophas. Must add that at the end. I just need to welcome representatives from the Lavender Hill community. They arrived while proceedings were underway. Welcome. Okay, then our next speaker here he's going to be on a remote. Dr. Paul Hendricks. He's not here today. He's based at Wits University. And for his input, firstly, the unit is based in deals with alternative histories and pedagogies at Wits University. you'll give us a perspective of the Teachers League of South Africa on school sport and physical culture. I think he had a chapter in one of the books which also spoke to that topic. So I'm going to hand over to the sound technician who's going to patch in Paul. Is he there? Ah, there we go. Okay, we'll adjust the program to accommodate the technology. Okay, so I'm going to call on Natasha Lowe. Okay, so Natasha is a sport officer at the University of Venda. She holds a degree in biokinetics and a postgraduate diploma in occupational health from University of Pretoria and a master's degree from Stellenbosch University. She is Francois' PhD student at the moment. He's her promoter. But Francois tells me that, Natasha, you remember Robinson Crusoe, the novel. Natasha is Francois' person Friday. I can't call her man Friday, no woman Friday. And, you know, our PhD students they are what they call at the cutting edge of things, but they change from cutting edge to leading edge. Cutting edge sounds a bit bloody, so they're at the leading edge, and he says he can draw on her. She's highly resourceful, and she does all kinds of things, so she is certainly a person Friday. Her work is in the hegemony of female rugby players or male rugby players, and now the females, in a sense, want to imitate male rugby players, the way they play and their antics on the rugby field. But I'm going to leave it at that. Natasha, it's over to you.
Thank you. I think the bloody is suitable for rugby players, so it's okay. Thank you very much, Prof, for the opportunity. So this is just a slight glimpse into my PhD, and you'll see a lot of the literature is actually from Prof's work. So these three players have quite a few things in common. They're not just female rugby players or international rugby players, but They also get exposed or got exposed during their playing careers to comments like these. Is the computer? Sorry. Oh, my word. Okay, there we go. There we go. Right, so these comments are all hegemonic, specifically relating to hegemonic masculinity and patriarchal gender ideology. Yet, these women kept breaking barriers despite these type of comments. One of the players is actually seated here, Springbok captain Ingrid Botha. So what is hegemony? Right, it's from the Greek term hegemonia, and it's describing dominating relationships. So it's the domination over another through consent. So if you look at the Cambridge Dictionary, it gives a very simple explanation. The position of being the strongest and most powerful and therefore able to control others. But to understand the concept of hegemony, consideration must be given to how this relates to power and culture. And there's two historical figures central to this, Antonio Gramsci and Karl Marx. So Gramsci theorized cultural hegemony, so that's the ideological and cultural domination of one class over another. So if you look at Gramsci's idea of consent, it's not the consent that we think of today. It's basically the authority of the dominant or ruling class that flows into the minds of the ruled classes without any resistance. That means that you accept the dominant group's values, beliefs, and norms as a common sense. We also look at Karl Marx due to his scientific contribution on how he analyzed society. He observed how an economical system influenced culture and society, and those at the top of the system holds the power. So both Marx and Gramsci therefore centers culture as and the role it plays within systems that serve to control or navigate people into a certain direction. Right. So in gender studies, there's one word we use to describe men's general power over women, and that word is patriarchy. This supports the idea of a certain gender order, and hegemonic masculinity is very closely linked to this patriarchy. Right, so Raymond Connell's application of Gramsci's hegemonic theory of masculinity is a very productive and useful paradigm to analyze the relationship between men and the institution of sport. Connell worked very closely connecting hegemonic masculinity to patriarchy. And if you look at patriarchy, it centers basically around the relationship between men and women and relationship to power and culture. My study is this a social historical narrative that will challenge the hegemony within South African rugby, her story, instead of taking for granted history or his story. Okay, if we go back to some of the comments, we've said that it reflects hegemonic masculinity and patriarchal gender ideology. And if we go to the literature, we can't help but think of the so-called gymnastics movement that originated in Czechoslovakia, and it became the school of manliness. There was a specifically gendered role. So if men and women didn't train together, and men's roles were seen as the protector. So he is the strong man, which means the type of movement and training to become strong was like gymnastics movements such as parallel bars, where with women, the idea centers around motherhood. So to move a certain way with grace and taking into consideration the whole time that motherhood, so please don't let her jump off things, so more of a dance type of movement. And this indicated to how sport, like gymnastics, reflected and endorsed patriarchal values and gender orders. And this led to power imbalances. In our context, we can look at the work from Dean Allen, where we in the Afrikaner community, where I'm Afrikaans speaking, that volksmoeder. So white Afrikaans speaking men had this idea of what is a typical Afrikaans speaking woman should look like. And again, that word motherhood, moeder, which is a very great word. I'm very grateful to my mother. But it was given to Afrikaner woman, and it basically put her next to the rugby field. So she was the one that can bring oranges and water and wash the rugby jerseys and tend to scrape knees, but she's not allowed on the field of play. And Allen claims, due to this, Afrikaner women remain submissive participants within the South African patriarchal society, specifically in male-dominant practices such as politics and rugby. Comments like this are hegemonic as it reflects dominant cultural norms about bodies and gender. If we go to the literature again, Dr. Mano actually spent a whole season with a women's basketball team in the United States and compiled this book. And what we've seen is a lot of the dominant groups maintain power not only through coercion, but by making their worldview natural or common sense. So they've got this idea, what is a real woman? She is slender, she looks a certain way, she behaves a certain way, she's soft. She is not loud, she is not muscular, and she is not strong. So there was a lot of gender policing also taking place in this basketball team. So they would actually tell the women what they should wear when they go out. Tie up your hair, you should have long hair. So a lot of policing around that. If we go to another more control and regulation of women's bodies, particular relating to dress code, like with Muslim sportswomen regarding the hijab, it serves as a site of asserting patriarchal power and reinforcing hegemonic masculinity. From this piece of work, it was actually stated that in the Quran, the term when it talk about decency, it's for both male and female, yet the scrutiny always falls on the woman and the woman's way how they dress. The dominant narratives, and often influenced by the Western perspective, contribute to the misrepresentation of Muslim women. They argue that the Western society often view the hijab as a symbol of oppression, and this reinforces the idea that Western women are more empowered. So for me, this definitely, they already have a barrier. They are women of color, they can be and a religion that also, and all they want to do is actually just play a sport. Where if a guy pitches, that's it, he can just play rugby. Prof, I only touched a little bit because this is one of a book to look into. But even in this book, we've seen how it was dictated to what type of physical movement woman was allowed to do, and always central to the idea of motherhood. So the type of movement, more flowy dance type of movement, no strength, and the limited that there is strength would focus a lot onto the class separation. So when the Cape Education Department brought in compulsory school, missionary schools did not form part of that, where all the money and the resources will move to. So now we've got a part of the separation, like we know the whole of the apartheid thing, where now we limit not just your education, but the type of education you also receive. So the elite British and Afrikaner established and maintained hegemony as they controlled education, the promotion of specific forms of physical culture, and the management of racial and class divisions. So the institution, and this institution of education and sport as well as an institution, shape the values of the population. So it's a tool that reinforces racial hierarchies and limit the opportunities for certain groups, as the book also displays. And today, still women are part of that minorities that, if just a slight look into South African rugby, the resources that's being given to compared from the men and the women. Okay, but every single time that women participate in sport traditionally dominated by men, they do challenge this hegemonic masculinity. But we still see the hierarchies very present in our boardrooms, on our sport fields, and on our courts. To break this hegemonic chain, it's not just enough to write women into history. It is very important to tell their stories and experiences in meaningful ways. And this is where the study comes in. It will try to, with the aim to foreground performance and institutional narratives of women that formed and molded Springbok rugby in the 21st century. And this can be achieved by identifying institutional her stories that were at play during these women's careers, indicating their biographical details and exploring the contribution they made to the game. So why her story? Because we have 2.7 million women's players globally. Rugby World Cup 2025 already shattered previous records of over 220,000 tickets sold. It will be the largest sporting event hosted in the UK this year. The most followed rugby player in the world is not a male. It's a female. And she's got even more followers than the governing body of World Rugby. We see the investment from women made into women's sport. And what is quite significant with this input from Michelle Can is that during LA 2028, we will actually have more female than male participants. We will have 16 soccer teams compared to 12 men's soccer teams. We also see this sport, 44% of young audiences prefer to watch women's sports over men's sport. Parity, where in one of the early statements it's actually said that women's sport is boring to watch and no one watches. It's not true. Look at this. The presence of a male hegemony is operative in a variety of sports. It's a hegemony that is interwoven with a lack of opportunity for women's participation at various levels within hierarchical structures of sports institutions. Sport and rugby is a very powerful tool to convey cultural and social values and beliefs. And the study will not just aim to write women into history or South African rugby history, but to tell her story. The contribution made by these Springbok captains to South African rugby is very crucial in challenging gender stereotypes and transforming social ideas. This will also start a process of addressing the void that exists in biographical research about women's rugby history in South Africa. Thank you. Now it's not seeming like it wants to go.
Okay. Thank you for that perspective, Natasha. And she is resourceful. She brought the clicker. So just a quick thing. I want to welcome Ingrid Botha, the South African Springbok rugby captain. Okay. And that just reminded me of something happened a good few years ago. They said that, you remember when Neil Tovey was the soccer captain? When Neil Tovey walks into a restaurant, all the waiters know him, but the patrons don't know him. And I'm sure if Sia Kolisi walked in here, we would all have recognized him. And I don't know how many of us recognize Ingrid, so we have a long way to go, Natasha, to somehow breaking down the hegemony of gender in sport. You've got a lot of work to do. We're looking forward to your thesis or publications. Okay, how are we doing with the sound? Are we going to bring in the remote people, or are we going to continue? We can. Yes? Okay, so we're going to go back to Paul Hendricks then. Yeah, I didn't introduce him earlier. So, you ready to roll? Okay.
First and foremost, I want to congratulate FRANCOIS on the release of his book, Physical Education and Physical Culture in South Africa, 1837 to 1966. Today, friends, comrades, and guests, I'm Paul Hendricks from the Wit School of Education at the University of the Witwatersrand and a former school teacher of South Peninsula High. First and foremost, I want to congratulate Francois CLEOPHAS on the release of his book, Physical Education and Physical Culture in South Africa, 1837 to 1966. It is a privilege to be part of this launch of Francois' long overdue book, which follows on from his PhD. I'm sure this publication will contribute to the broader scholarship in sport history and sports activism, both in South Africa and beyond the country's borders. My presentation today is based on a chapter in the second book Francois produced in 2021, titled Critical Reflections on Physical Culture on the Edges of Empire. My chapter in the latter book is titled, as it is here in this presentation, Re-engaging Non-Racial Sport, the Teachers League of South Africa and the School Sports Movement in the Western Cape, 1956 to 1994. The aim of this presentation is to explore the resonance of the Teachers League of South Africa, the TLSA, or the League's ideas of non-racialism and non-collaboration within the mass-based school sports movement between the 1950s and the 1990s. To link the importance of the Teachers League of South Africa to the Western Province Senior School Sports Union, it is necessary to foreground a quote from Peter Meyer, a teacher at Harold Cressy High, in an interview I had with him in 2005. Peter had this to say: people always queried why was it that Western Province became so powerful in sport, or why was it that the Western Cape became the heart of FRANCOIS. It was because of the influence of the Western Province Senior School Sports Union, because of the influence of the Teachers League, the teachers in the Western Province, And no matter how much people would like to deny it, that was the fact of the situation, because the Teachers' League was very much a powerful force within the schools. Mayer's statement draws our attention to the undervalued, if not unrecognized, contributions of politically and socially conscious teachers within the non-racial school sport movement in the Western Cape during South Africa's apartheid years. It also points to a much neglected area of scholarship on how teacher activists sustained over a period of 4 decades mass-based school sport in socio-economically poor and under-resourced areas. Mayer's comment, furthermore, focuses our attention on the organizational and pedagogical work of a relatively small group of politically oriented teachers, educators who operated outside the more mainstream anti-apartheid politics represented by the Congress Alliance or the Congress Movement, specifically the African National Congress. For those who are not familiar with the Teachers' League, it's necessary to give a brief history of the TLSA. The League was established in 1913 as an accommodating, reformist, and therefore moderate, if not conservative, teachers' organization. It sought to achieve its aims for predominantly what it called colored teachers through patient negotiations with the education authorities. From 1915, the organization published the Educational Journal so that its views could be distributed nationwide. In 1918, the League adopted its motto, "Let us live for our children," which became the vision and philosophy of the organization at different periods in its history. This distinct inscription, "Let us live for our children," as with the organization's journal, the Educational Journal, remained a distinguishing feature of the League for many years. During the late 1930s, early 1940s, a split developed within the Teachers' League. During these years, a radical leadership emerged, influenced by the Workers' Party of South Africa, a Marxist left-wing grouping influenced by the Russian Revolution. In the slide are the two schools of thought within the League, separated by the Workers' Party's newsletter, The Spark. Abdullah Abdurrahman, the charismatic leader of the APO, represents the conservative or moderate section of the TLSA, while on the right is Ben Kies, who represented the younger, more radical section called the Young Turks within the TLSA, and was a member of the Workers' Party of South Africa. The Workers' Party shaped the emergence of what was to become called the Non-European Unity Movement, or the NEUM. The NEUM comprised the All-African Convention, the Anti-CAD, or Anti-Colored Affairs Department, and the ASC, or Anti-Segregatory Committee. The TLSA formed part of the Anti-CAD group. The pamphlet cover in the slide reflects the Anti-CAD's media in its attempt to mobilize people at the time. The NEUM adopted the 10-point program and the policy of non-collaboration by 1943-44. Non-racism was embedded in the organization's vision and practice. From the late 1940s and 1950s, the NEUM embarked on an intensive program to educate the oppressed on the nature of their oppression. This strategy was viewed by Zia Jaffe as the most sustained and intensive educational strategy in Africa at the time. There was a range of publications by leading members of the Unity movement aimed at re-educating the oppressed on what he termed the true history of South Africa and the nature of their oppression and exploitation. The Educational Journal, the TLSA's main mouth organ from the early years to the post-1994 period, aimed at educating readers on the importance of education for the oppressed and its links to politics, economics, and culture. The League due to its link to the NEUM, adopted non-racialism and non-collaboration to oppose segregation and apartheid. Non-racism meant the existence of one human race, none being a negation of race, while non-collaboration meant the refusal to operate the machinery of one's own oppression, and to break the slave mentality that resulted in one's own enslavement or sense of inferiority. This broad humanistic worldview was a central tenet of nation building for the unity movement, and was based on the concept of we build the nation, as it opposed racial and class divisions. For the League, this meant wedding politics and education to impede, obstruct, and undermine the state's divisive, race-based apartheid policies. Schools were viewed by the TLSA and Unity movement as the main transmitters of apartheid's separatist or racist ideology. The role of schooling and education, the Unity movement argued, was to ensure people of color accepted their social status of inferiority in a white-dominated society. In addition, the apartheid system of schooling aimed to produce non-white cheap labor to ensure the reproduction of labor and the economy. To overcome the apartheid divide amongst teachers and to unify the constituents within the federated non-European unity movement, the TLSA, along with the Cape African Teachers Association, CATA, an affiliate of the All African Convention, during the early 1950s, formed the Cape Teachers Federal Council. The image in the slide shows one of the meetings between the TLSA and CATA, or the Cape Teachers Federal Council. By the mid-1950s, however, leading members of the TLSA and CATA were banned under the Suppression of Communism Act, among other repressive laws and policies at the time. In the early 1960s, following Sharpeville and the banning of organizations within the liberation movement, such as the African National Congress and Pan-African Congress, the TLSA decided to go underground. There, the organization operated in secret until the early 1990s. During this nearly 30-year period, the TLSA teachers moved into civil society structures to further their political mission. These bodies included the non-racial school sports movement, the educational fellowships, such as PEF and COFEF, the cultural organizations, such as the Woven School of Dance, and local civic organizations, as well as the trade union movement. It was only by 1992, after the unbanning of the liberation movement, that the TLSA re-emerged as a public organization once again and took up the fight for more teachers, schools, resources, and quality teaching and education, as reflected in the newspaper articles in the slide. I would like to now connect the TLSA and the non-racial school sports movement more directly. A predecessor to the Western Province Senior School Sports Union was the West Schools. In 1955, the high school formed their own senior school sports union, the Western Province Senior School Sports Union. Harry Hendricks, a prominent TLSA teacher, who we see in the slide, became the union's first president. In this photograph from possibly the mid-1950s, we see Harry Hendricks and Richard Reeve, a former South Peninsula High, and later Hubert Teacher Training College lecturer, with high school athletes that include Cecil Blows, a top sprinter at the time. South Peninsula High was one of the first schools, along with several other high schools and teacher training colleges, to affiliate with and become members of the Western Province Senior School Sports Union. Here we have South Peninsula girls athletes in 1952. The South Peninsula High banner looks impressive. I think they need another one like this today. Western Province Senior Schools Sports Union, Year 2, a unitary, multi-code or multi-sports structure where schools affiliated directly with the union. This model meant that schools competed against each other over many sports, hence the multi-code approach, but was controlled by one sporting administrative body, the union, or the Western Province Senior Schools Sports Union. Western Province Senior Schools with Eastern Province, Transvaal and Natal were at the forefront in the formation of the South African Senior School Sports Association, SASA, in 1961. The sports field was viewed as an extension of the classroom for the Teachers' League, where the aim was to capture or win over the minds of the youth. The emergent sports movement adopted an implicit non-racial outlook, rejected racial categorizations. Both Carter and the TLSA believed that there is only one human race, Homo sapiens. Another former TLSA teacher, Dennis Brutus, had a strong influence on South African sport via SANROC, the South African Non-Racial Olympic Committee. SANROC is important as it had South Africa expelled from the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, by 1970. Frank van der Horst, a prominent sports activist and teacher in the 1960s through to the 1970s, recollected his experiences in relation to the unity movement as a student in the 1950s. In an interview I had with him in 2006, his viewpoint reflected the broader counterculture embedded in communities that arose in the 1950s. This was the rich tradition where I came from. We stayed in Cape Town, interacted with the All African Convention, Society of Young Africa, lived in the milieu of the anti-CAD and the TLSA in Cape Town, and were sustained ideologically by the All African Convention. It was virtually an interactive process all the time, and we got involved in debates and went to the New Era Fellowship every Saturday night to go and engage in debate. To us who were new at the time, it was a tremendous learning experience. They really provided a stimulating intellectual and political climate. School sports grew exponentially from the 1960s, and by the early 1970s, SASA and SAPSA, primary schools nationally, represented conservatively 200,000 school children throughout the country, according to Archer and Boylan. SASA became a founder member of SACOS, the South African Council on Sport, when it was formed in 1973. With no normal sport in an abnormal society, the famous SACOS catchphrase. Sport and politics were inseparable for SACOS, as it represented the sports wing of the liberation movement. As such, SACOS adopted a non-aligned political identity, catering for activists from across organizations in the liberation movement. The new coordinating sports body gained credibility over a short period of time, and once it had secured sufficient groundswell support and international recognition, as seen by the images in the slide, SACOS and SANROC called for a boycott of South African sport. This resulted in the adoption of the Commonwealth Glen Eagles Agreement of 1977, which effectively blocked or barred international sports people from visiting South Africa. In the same year, 1977, SACOS adopted the Double Standards Resolution, or the DSR, which you can read in the resolution in the slide. The DSR marked a turning point for South African sports persons, preventing them from playing sport on both sides of the political spectrum, the apartheid and anti-apartheid sides. The DSR has been mistakenly associated with the strategy or policy of non-collaboration. In short, the DSR rejected on a principle basis the government's multinational or multiracial sports policies, while non-collaboration was a political strategy or policy to break the link with those collaborators who operated the government and state machinery. Non-collaboration also involved the building of independent working class organizations. Nonetheless, the DSR was viewed as largely the product of the Black consciousness movement and the unity movement's non-collaborationist influence in the sports movement. Norman Middleton, for instance, the SAST president, was forced to resign owing to his membership of the Colored Representative Council. The non-racial sports movement placed opposition to racial capitalism, not simply apartheid now, at the center of its campaign. These developments represented the increased radicalization of SACOS during the 1970s into the 1980s. Notwithstanding the politics of the time, it became clearly evident that athletics was a strength of senior schools, producing consistently popular and tough competition.
Am I on? We're going to move to the next input, which is also a remote speaker, but it's a pre-recorded. She's from Brazil, across the Atlantic Ocean. I think over time in the world, there's always been, due to colonialism and other negative interactions, a north-south divide. And from that came the idea that we need to engage in more south-south collaboration. So Francois is engaged in a collaborative process and work with this professor in Brazil. She is Evelisa Quatzal, okay? She's a professor in the Department of Physical Education at the Federal University of Viçosa in Brazil. Her research interests are in the history of the body, history of physical education and sport, and transnational perspectives in sports history. I think there are a lot of parallels and points of resonance between Francois' work and this lady's work in Brazil. So she's going to make some input for a few minutes, and I can hand over to our sound crew to patch her in.
Hello, everybody. I'd like to start by thanking Francois for the invitation to participate in this launch of his book. I'd also like to congratulate Francois for the thorough and detailed historical work that inspired this book. It is a fine piece of historiographic work based on a comprehensive number of various sources that allowed the reader to approach the complex relations between physical education and physical culture in South Africa. As someone from a totally different country, I know nothing about South Africa's history. Francois' book gave me the opportunity to learn about such an intricate and complex topic through the debates and struggles that permeated physical education and physical culture in this context. It is impressive to see how there are similarities between the trajectories of physical education and physical culture in South Africa and Brazil. In both countries, for instance, Link's method of gymnastics was considered the most rational and thus the appropriate one to be used in schools. Teacher training programs took time to incorporate gymnastics lessons as part of their curricula. As we move forward in the 20th century, physiology labs also gain more importance over pedagogical discussions when it comes to physical education and movement culture. Most universities here, mine included, are dominated by those who work in labs, studying the physiological effects of physical exercises on the body, and sometimes doing so acritically. On the other hand, the pedagogical discussions are relegated to a second degree, as if it was a minor subject. And even if history has a little more space in academia than in South Africa, we must always defend our position, for there's always someone questioning the legitimacy and mainly the utility of studying sports and physical education history. To those who ask why or what's the use of history in an undergrad training in physical education and sport, I respond by invoking something that Professor Silvana Gellner once wrote: to denaturalize facts about physical education and sports. If there's a reason for us to study the history of physical education and sports, it is to understand that things weren't always the way they are now. And that perspective means there's room for change. Perhaps that's a bit too optimistic on my part, but studying the history of physical education and sports helps us understand how and why we have reached the situation we are in at this point. And this comprehension is key to questioning and fostering debate. That's what Francois' book provides us, a comprehensive understanding of complex power relations that allows us to understand how physical education became an institutionalized knowledge in South Africa. Who were the people involved? What were the interests behind their actions? What were their consequences? There is conceptual care in the book. While physical education is seen as a planned movement activities guided by specific policies and pedagogy, physical culture is understood as demonstrations of health, strength, fitness, and later sports. This precision is seen throughout the book, helping to paint the scenario for the debates. Although there are similarities between the developments of physical education and physical culture in South Africa and Brazil during the period established for the study, there are also differences that reflect on their historical process. For instance, the influence of missionaries and movements such as muscular Christianity seems stronger in the South African case. There are indications that Salesians helped introduce Swedish gymnastics and sports in the education and acculturation process of indigenous communities in the central region of Brazil. The YMCA participated intensively in the debates promoted by the Brazilian Association of Education. However, apparently the actions led by religious organizations did not influence the development of physical education and physical culture in Brazil as much as they did in South Africa. The British influence also seems to differ between the two contexts. While it is true that British immigrants helped introducing some sports, especially football, in Brazil, this introduction also was accompanied by the work of other ethnic groups of European ascendancy that immigrated to the country at the turn of the 19th century. Thus, the development of Brazilian physical culture was marked by contributions of Germans, French, Portuguese, Italians, and even Japanese, who arrived mainly until the mid-20th century and founded clubs as a place to socialize, and at some point, as a place to maintain their own identity. In the case of German immigrants, their clubs were mainly devoted to Turnen, the gymnastics system they created in the 19th century. One of the characteristics of such associations is that even if they accepted people from other ethnic backgrounds, only those who were adult males over 18 years old and spoke German had the right to vote and to be elected. Thus, these clubs had a restrictive membership policy that excluded most of Brazilian population. Therefore, although the influences in Brazil were perhaps more varied, sports clubs and associations were equally close to those who were not part of the white middle and upper classes. Finally, something that crosses the discussions about physical education and physical culture in both contexts is their relation to hygienist and eugenic movements. Francois' account of the South African process leads us to a century of explicit discriminatory policies that grouped people according to skin color. It shows how such policies marginalized those classified as colored or non-European as they were named in the sources, and how some people in these groups attempting to, and I quote, expressed that they wanted to share the economic and status privileges of British high culture society, accepted this marginalization and continued to express loyalty to a crown that only exploited them. It shows that there were attempts to resist racism, but these attempts were usually followed by an even more intense racist response from the government. As a result, in terms of physical education and physical culture, this led to less access to physical education in school, since most colored children, as they were named in the sources, were out of the system, and the teacher training programs had different programs for white and colored men, as they were named in the period. It also meant that physical culture elements, especially recreational activities, were also seen as a tool to channel the rise in political pressures. While these policies were explicitly stated by laws in South Africa, in Brazil we tried to hide racial issues by sweeping them under the rug. Laws were not explicit, but in the name of a so-called modernity, a widening policy of the population was put into practice at the turn of the century. According to the law, the Brazilian state had ended slavery. Still, instead of incorporating these people into society, policies threw them to the margins and substituted their labor force with that of paid white European immigrants. During the 1930s, intellectuals like Gilberto Freire tried to praise the miscegenation that characterized the Brazilian people, claiming that the country lived a racial democracy that allegedly resulted in a less racist society. I'd like to emphasize the allegedly, since those Brazilians from African and indigenous ancestry remained marginalized, with no proper access to living, hygiene, and education, and at the end of the day, physical education and physical culture. Francois' book, as we can see, is a provocative work. Through a thorough, detailed, and comprehensive work with historical sources, Francois leads us to over 100 years of physical education and physical culture, deeply marked by issues of race, gender, and class. And as he says, and shows clearly, these issues are best understood as social relations of oppression rather than as solely ideologies. Physical education and physical culture were part of these disputes. They were part of power projects aimed at sustaining a colonial inheritance. The accounts on teacher training, access to physical culture clubs, outdoor activities, the relations between religious organizations and physical culture are all elements that lead us to reflection. In this sense, it may be not an easy reading, for it makes us look back on how the colonizing process marked the society. In my case, as an outsider, it made me reflect on how the differences between Brazil and South African colonization led to such different paths considering physical education and physical culture, and yet we do share similarities. Physical culture and physical education matter, as Francois insists. They matter because they are permeated by and express broader social issues. They matter because they can create communities. They matter because they can discipline, but they can also make us strong. They matter because they can change. If it is true that history allows us to denaturalize what we take for granted, then this means things weren't always the way they are like today. Francois shows us in detail what has been done in physical education and physical culture in South Africa so far. Does it have to remain a field for segregation? Does it have to remain a field marked by scientific racism? Or is there space for change? It is up to us to keep digging and understanding this past and hopefully start creating new possibilities for a more inclusive physical education and physical culture right now. Thank you and congratulations, Francois, for the great book.
Okay, thank you there to Professor Coetzee. I think what she does tell us is that we live in a small world, a global village, where even smaller with technology now when it works, that, you know, the similarities are there, racism, oppression, because they also come from a history of colonization of Portuguese people. So there will always be those issues and problems, especially in education and in the political realm and in sport. Okay, so we're going to move to someone who is present. I want to call on Dr. Therese Fish, Deputy Dean for Health Science, Social Impact. That's the faculty in which Francois' department is located. Good morning.
So I didn't send my bio sketch, so I'm going to take some few minutes to speak to it. Okay. So thanks and congratulations. The last time I was at one of Francois' book launches, it was in the middle of the pandemic and we were online. So it's good to have an in-person session today. And so for the colleagues here today, I'm Therese Fish, product of the southern suburbs. And so just listening to some of the talks took me down memory lane. And so I've got my sister Jerry with me today and my brother-in-law. And my brother-in-law Ivan tells me him and Francois know each other from sports. You wouldn't say so now, Ivan, because he's not so sporty anymore. But we certainly grew up. We grew up in Wynberg. And my father, Ronald Fish, was a very staunch SACOS member for many years. He played table tennis. He was, in his 60s, he was the champion in his category. And so I think, and then I went to Harold Cressy. And so certainly some of the stories told today brings back memories of our past. In fact, Peter Meyer was my mathematics teacher at Harold Cressy, and Brian Keys was a prior principal at Harold Cressy, but when I knew him, he was my driver. He was the taxi driver that took me to school. I was late every morning for school because of Mr. Keys. And so this school also has historical significance for us as a family. We were 7 children, and 4 of our older siblings actually were came to South Peninsula High, and Mr. Morat, one of the previous principals, just stayed a few roads from us. And so we have a rich context of the importance of South Peninsula, both in our political and in our social fabric. And Ideal was at university with me. And so I am one of a first-generation university graduate in our family. I finished my medical training in 1986 at UCT, but entered UCT in 1981 when we still needed permits to go to university. And over the years, I was a latecomer to postgraduate training. I finished my master's in business administration just before my 40th birthday, and my doctorate from Bath University just before my 60th birthday. And so I've been a clinician, I've been a health manager, and now I've gone the full circle back in higher education, where we train the next generation of researchers and health professionals. And so I'm in my 20th year as the Vice Dean of Clinical Services and Social Impact at the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences. And so we're quite unique in our faculty because our classroom is not in a building. Our classroom is in the health system. and our research is done in the health system and mostly in the public sector. And so we need to think very differently around how we do our training and our research. And for us to have competent health practitioners, we need to have people who practice evidence-based health care and do research that is relevant for the people and of this country and beyond. And our ultimate goal is to make sure that we have a healthy population. But at the same time, we must recognize that the health system is not solely responsible for the health of the people of a country. And so the social and environmental determinants of health are quite critical for us to ensure that we have a healthy population. And we know that we will make the biggest impact on the health of the population if we educate our women and if we have clean water. And so that as a health professional, you think, oh gosh, what can I do about that? But we need to be sure that our graduates, our researchers are advocates for health, and we can advocate with government to ensure that people actually have decent accommodation, that we have water, and that we educate our population. And so many people speak about the whole of society approach. We used to speak about the whole of government approach, that government, the social security, the police services, the education, health services need to work together. But we need to think more broadly about the system, and we speak about a whole of society approach, because society must partner with us as universities, with government, to ensure that we have healthy populations. And so my brief from Francois was to speak about health studies in communities, and so I thought, oh my goodness, what does that even mean? And so I thought, well, I mean, I am the vice dean, so I have some liberties in terms of what I can speak about. So I thought I'd just briefly touch on what we call inclusive health ecosystems. And I'll try to bring it back to some of the discussion that we had this morning. And so when you did English, or those of us who did English and other languages, you know, we have these short words called prepositions, like on and with. And so I thought I'll just use three prepositions linking it to community. On community, for community, and with community. And so if we look at our sector of health, both in terms of teaching and training and research. And we say we've done lots of work on communities. And so if we go into our history, we have lots of research done on people on the margins, whether people with disabilities, people of different races, and lots of exploitative practices. Some of the aspects that Francois spoke about, eugenics, and the exploitative practices around eugenics. And in fact, in this country, with the system of apartheid, and I am linked to Stellenbosch University, and we've got a massive hospital that I look out of my window and I can see Tygerberg Hospital. That hospital was built at that place at that time, and next year we will be 70 years old. It was built with the idea that we needed to be close enough to colored people so that we had enough people that we could train white doctors on. And so it's not by accident that I use the word on, because we have done a lot of research on people. And even in the past, we've trained on people, you know, and especially on poor people and people on the margins. And so over the years, we've started to move to say, well, let's do health. The turn of the century, primary health care would be embedded in our health system, and we know that that didn't come to fruition. And we saw then the Millennium Development Goals. By the millennium, those, I forget how many millennium goals there were, but were there 12? 12 millennium goals. We haven't achieved those goals in terms of development, including the health goals. And now we have the sustainable development goals. 17 of them which drive us to actually make sure that we have universal health coverage. And I think we have started to move. And so certainly in health in itself, we really do need to identify health needs. And so we do that for people. And so we need to engage with communities to see what are the kind of diseases, and we know the burden of chronic diseases of lifestyle. If we look at our children have a growing obesity problem. And so some of the aspects you spoke about physical education as a prime component of the education of children, and sports. Sports has become a luxury in schools these days, that the schools in the suburbs will have sports and the schools, the poorest schools actually don't. And so identifying the needs and using that to inform our public health interventions. And so as a young doctor, I remember always saying to those fat makulus who just say, you must exercise, you've got diabetes and hypertension, you've got to exercise. And people, you know, and you're very ignorant when you're a young professional, you used to think, oh, well, it's so simple. They must just exercise. And when people say, but how do I exercise, doctor? Because if I walk in our suburb, I'd get shot. In Bishop Lavis, we do a lot of work in that area. It's really difficult to speak about public health interventions and expect people to do it if we don't have safe societies. And so part of the work that we need to do is to improve health outcomes, but we have to do it with our communities, with our partners, and monitor how that changes over time. And so it brings me to an area that is growing, increasing traction at our university and beyond, is really to do our training and our research with communities. Because the community is really the reason for our being. And if we don't actually do that, engage our communities in health research and in our training, we actually don't build the kind of trust and the participation that we want from communities, and really give communities again the knowledge, the skills through our education system, through our interventions as health professionals and health systems to actually take control of their own health. Because we as health professionals, our health system can only do so much. But again, how do you say to somebody, eat healthily, when VAT increases to 15% or 50%? I don't know when budget we're in now, budget 3.0. Let's see what that will show. And so more and more, we really need to collaborate and co-create with communities in our research, in our teaching and training. And so for us as health professional trainers, we do a lot of clinical training in partnership with the Department of Health, Social Services and Education. And we have agreements with government in terms of doing that. But we really need to deepen our partnerships with communities. And so we often we really do train in the public sector, and we don't train. I mean, many of us are have private health coverage. You've never seen a student in the private sector because it's, we have to train on the others. And so I think it is around looking both at public and private, and us as individuals saying, actually, if I want to make sure when I'm old that I have good health professionals to look after me, I better make sure that they're well trained. And so, you as members of society, you can also make that offer to say, but where are the students? Why aren't the students at Mediclinic when I go and have my whatever surgery there? We really only do it in the public sector. So there are opportunities to deepen that. And at the same time, we do want to deepen our relationship with communities. We have an increasing challenge of our students and our health workers being assaulted, robbed, shot. And so again, it puts huge pressure on the system, the health system, our educational system, if we don't have safe places. But then I have to remind our students that we can say we don't want to go and train in Bishop Lavis or in Kailicha, but many of our patients, our staff, and our students actually live in those areas. And so how do we actually strengthen the fabric of society? And then similarly, in research, how do we actually partner with communities to do research? How do you get people who are diabetics to be part of your research projects, who have hypertension, so that we don't just say, oh, well, we know that hypertension and tuberculosis. We're excellent in doing research in HIV and tuberculosis in our university, but how do we work with people who have tuberculosis, who are HIV positive, and not just be an outsider in the system? But that inclusive practice requires intention, it requires careful planning with communities, reflection, and also quite a lot of resources, because things just move a bit slower than, if you say, oh, I want to do research, quick. We can do it if we don't actually engage with communities. And so as a university, and we have our Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research here with us today, we know all the fiscal constraints that are in the system. So government doesn't easily give us money to do research. I mean, it's really, we have to beadle, we have to beg, but there's lots of other priorities in the country. The US federal funding, we saw the Trump administration just remove a lot of resources, and so this does make us think a little, sit up and say, what must we do in the South about our research funding, our funding for health care? How do we prioritize health care? And so I want to end with one of my colleagues, my young colleagues at the university, who won an award for inclusive health research. She says, at times, working in communities often goes unnoticed in the publish or perish world that is academia. But the acknowledgement of people's stories making a difference for science goes a long way. As awardees, we shared this sentiment, and in sharing our stories, they formed a bond that will see them partnering together in future projects. And I want to acknowledge the work that you are doing about her stories, because it is actually speaking to the people that are most affected, whether it's in health, in sport, and how we can actually bring those stories back into academia. So Francois, congratulations on your book. There's a number of them. Am I also getting a copy, or must I buy mine? But congratulations on the work that you do. Thank you. Very well.
Thank you to Dr. Fish. We're almost there. Prof. Karen Wellman, she's up next. She's the Executive Head of the Department of Sport Science and Lifestyle Medicine in the Faculty of Health Sciences. So she and Therese, they work together. Therese is a Deputy Dean. I think Francois, in a conversation, told me that he thinks Professor Wellman must be credited with rescuing the fields of physical education and sport history from the brink of extinction. She's recognized the importance of the work and understands the importance of learning lessons from the past and not making the same mistakes as we go forward. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Francois. No pressure. It is my great pleasure to be here actually today to celebrate the launch of Prof. Francois CLEOPHAS's book. But before I go into that, I met Francois in 2011 when he joined our department, and I think actually our connection grew more from our love for history. He knows way more than I do, but I think I'm just fascinated, so please do not ever stop sharing. We also realized that we have family that come from Hopefield, and every so often I get these WhatsApps with a little bit of family history or something that's going on in Hopefield. Thank you very much for that too. I do share it with my dad. Yes, but I think mostly the thing that's always stood out for me with Francois is that he's made me more comfortable with uncomfortable conversations. He keeps my toes as well. So I am very grateful for that. And so I do think his research in his book is truly important and a timely contribution to our understanding to sport and physical education in South Africa. I've had the privilege of witnessing his dedication, rigor, and passion that he's gone through in his research over the years. What stands before us today is not merely a book, but an insightful contribution that illuminates the often overlooked dimensions of our shared history. This book stands out for its ability to connect the past with the present in a way that's both meaningful and necessary. It may seem at first that this work is all about physical education, how people in South Africa over more than a century were taught to move their bodies, stay fit, and play sport. But as Prof. CLEOPHAS so clearly show us, these seemingly simple acts were never separate from the broader social world in which they took place. Physical education was shaped by forces of politics, race, class, and colonial influence. It reveals that physical culture is never just about the body and physical activity, but is invariably entwined with the broader social, political, and cultural currents of society. And we also heard not just here, but internationally as well. His book reminds us that the way physical education was introduced into schools, the values it promoted, and the people it included and excluded reflected the society of time. What began as efforts to instill discipline and health through European models of exercise quickly became something far more complex. Physical activity became a space where identity was shaped, boundaries were drawn, and systems of power were reinforced. Through this lens, we gain fresh insights into physical practices, where both reflections of and the vehicles for broader social dynamics of South Africa were implemented. But for me, this book also highlights something else. It highlights resilience. In communities where access to formal sport and structured physical education was limited or denied, alternative sporting cultures took root. From gymnasiums to playing fields, these were the spaces where creativity, pride, identity, and social cohesion was formed. In tracing this history, Prof. CLEOPHAS gives voice to stories and experiences that were often overlooked and forgotten, which is most important. So why does it matter today? Well, it matters because we cannot fully understand the present, and I think Francois said this too. We cannot fully understand the present without reflecting on the past. And so history is entwined into all of our knowledge. It's not just in history books. As we continue to develop inclusive approaches in sport, education, and health, we must be mindful of these legacies we inherit. The research allows us to critically examine the structures and systems that shape participation and physical activity, even today. So what I find most valuable about this work is that it helps us appreciate how deeply sport and physical education are tied to who we are as a society. And we heard from all the speakers today how much it meant to them and the influence and impact that it's had on them. But these are not neutral spaces. They are reflections of our values, our histories, our aspirations. As educators and practitioners and researchers, we are called to build on this knowledge with awareness and purpose. Prof. CLEOPHAS's work is not only a contribution to sports history, it is a contribution to our collective understanding of how physical activity, so often taken for granted, can tell powerful stories about who we are, where we are from, and where we might go. Francois, your contribution extends far beyond the specific subject matter. You have shown us how careful historical research can illuminate present-day concerns and how valuable it is. You have demonstrated how examining seemingly ordinary practices can reveal extraordinary insights. Thank you. And then to everyone else, I want to encourage you to engage deeply with this work, whether your interest lies in history, education, social dynamics, or sport. You will find much to consider within the pages of his book or books. On behalf of our department, Francois, I would like to congratulate you on this important achievement. Your work enriches our academic community and challenges us all to think more deeply about the role of physical culture and shaping our society. Thank you very much, and congratulations again.
Thank you, Professor Wellman. I want to call on our final speaker, the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research, Innovation and Postgraduate Studies at Stellenbosch University, Professor Sibusiso Moyo.
Good. I think it's already afternoon, right? So good afternoon, everyone. Can we just do a small exercise? So where you are, can you stand up and then look at the person on your left and the right and just introduce yourself if you don't know them. If you know them, say something to them. Okay. Same to, oh, you know each other. Yeah. Okay. All right, so we know everyone, right? Now, I know some people are already sitting with families, so there's, yeah, so I think because of the function we are at today, and because it's sports, I think movement and activity is important because that's how we socialize. So my name is Sibusiso Moyo. I'm the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research, Innovation and Postgraduate Studies. I won't give my life history, but I'll start from the middle. So I've spent about 24 years at University of Technology, Durban University of Technology, before I came here in a similar role. But my background is mathematics. And so you can imagine, for me generally, I mean, if I talk about teaching, for those of you who, how many of you have been teachers, have a history of teaching in the group? Raise your hand. Yeah. How many of you have been in the classroom recently? Yeah? So I think you can imagine. So yesterday I took an experiment. I decided to teach. I don't have to teach, by the way, but I decided yesterday that I'll go and teach a first-year class, and it was a group of computer science students. And I can tell you, they're brilliant, right? But it is very hard if you can't get them engaged the whole time. And you'll find that there are quite a number of studies which talk about, like these days, especially concentration. Our students, and youth get very bored within an hour. And I don't know how many of you are still listening to whoever is speaking. Maybe already on the phone doing something. And I know that there are some groups which are also talking, I think some of the research which is looking at stopping kids from using certain social media platforms up to the age of 16. So there's this debate going on about how to get people engaged right through the process. So I want to start by saying that sports plays a very critical role in terms of really helping people to achieve their best. And doing maths, physics, and other subjects, which are very technical, is not easy. It's quite hard. I mean, it's easy when you start at school because you're working with numbers, adding, and so forth. But later on, it needs a lot of concentration. And then, unfortunately, our system, I think higher education system, if you look at the curriculum, even in the schools, we teach everybody the same way. We assume that every student must sit there for hours and listen to someone in front, and that, they're probably, I think at university, we also assume that they'll all become also, professors and readers. But some people have different skills and different ways of learning. we need to also think about in the way we design the curriculum. But I think that sports breaks that barrier. It almost equalizes when you see people on the field, despite the background, they can all become the best that they can. And I think in what we do, also thinking about people living with other types of challenges and disabilities is also important, because when we design programs, often they are designed without really thinking about, how other people who may have challenges can participate in those programs. So I'm really happy to be part of this. So I just want to say quickly that the book, of course, on cultural education, physical education and physical culture in South Africa by Francois offers a comprehensive historical analysis, of course, of how physical education and physical culture evolved in South Africa, and of course, particularly with your lens in terms of looking at the Cape and Western Cape in particular during the colonial and apartheid periods. And of course, this interplay between race, gender, class, and politics in shaping the bodily practices and educational systems, I think, is something that is critical for us to look at. So I think we've heard from the different speakers who've all spoken about, the book and how important that is. But for me, it was really interesting to also see, I think, like the PhD, which Natasha is also doing, which also brings in the issue of, gender and women and how we can learn from that and hopefully inform future practices as well. So in terms of also shedding, I think for me also what's important to take away is around the issues of community and resistance, and just trying to see how people really, despite all the odds at the time, despite all of that, how the school, for example, also provided a place where students could still thrive to become the best that they could, on how communities engaged, adapted, resisted and imposed physical culture practices reflecting on broader struggles for identity as well. So on my side, I just want to say congratulations once again for meticulously documenting the history of physical education and culture in South Africa. The work, of course, fills a critical gap in sports history. And it was also interesting to see that I know we are the only university offering sports history, but I'm just wondering about the opportunity that is there on influencing other institutions to also do the same, right? And how we communicate the knowledge that we, generate in the university with our communities. So being able to come to a school like this one, rather than having the same launch at the university with a select group of people, I think for me shows just the humbleness that, Francois has in terms of being able to reach the community and impact that. But I think, I saw that, of course, we had our representative from WITS, but it would be good to think about how, as a system, we can really reinforce this, or even thinking about a chair or an institute which looks at the theme but brings different communities together. And I say this in the context of right now in the country. If we look at youth unemployment, it's I think we are one of the highest countries with youth unemployment, which is over, I think, 64%. And then to think about how, and by the way, we know that yes, people go to universities, have a better chance of getting employed, but in my real world, I deal with PhDs who are not employed. So you have a doctorate, but you can't find a job. I deal with also people who have degrees without jobs. But now the question is, what opportunities can sport offer, to people to start even the social entrepreneurship, enterprises that can also help them, yes, develop communities, but also start up something that can make a difference. So I'd like us maybe to think about that on our side as well as a university in terms of what role we can play. So, but for me, I think just the closing remark is that, of course, the book stands out as a testament, of course, to the importance of sports history, examining physical culture with its borders, of course, in terms of the historical and societal context which are taken into account. And I really want to thank you once again, and also thank the school, the principal, and everybody that spoke for the contributions that you have made. I had a few quotes which I think I should share, because I've not made a long speech, because I heard the people before me so that I don't repeat myself. But I thought maybe if I can just, there were some quotes I was looking at which I should leave you with. And chairperson, our program director, I'll just take maybe one or two, which I thought were really good, something that resonated with me. So Michael Jordan, I don't know if you remember Michael Jordan. So he says, my attitude is that if you push me towards a weakness, I will turn that weakness into a strength. And I think sport does that to everyone. And then there's Gabby Douglas. I don't know if you remember Gabby Douglas, says hard days are the best because that's when champions are made. And each one of us in our lives struggle with a number of things. And those of us, of course, in all the positions that we may be, whether it's leadership, whether it's a parent and so forth, we have different struggles, but we know that we have to be resilient. And then Homer Rice, and I'll stop just now, says, you can motivate by fear and you can motivate by reward, but these methods are only temporary. Okay, the only thing that is lasting is self-motivation. And the question I want to leave you with is, how do we motivate people to be the best version of themselves? And I believe that sport is one of the ways of doing that. And understanding the history of where we come from, like the author has mentioned, is important to help us to understand where we want to go. So with those few words, I want to thank you again, congratulate you, and thank everybody who has joined us on this mission. Thank you.
Thank you to Professor Moyo. Okay, so we've come to the end of the program. Just one or two things, announcements. There are some posters on the back wall on the left-hand side, my left. Please peruse and have a look there. Then there are some prints of the articles which you can take for free. And then there are books you might like to buy at the same table. Okay, so the freebie and then you pay, or maybe the other way around. Okay, and then a big thank you to the Secretary of the Department. Is that right? Mornay Hansen. Hassan, I'm so sorry. Thank you very much for all your input in getting the event organized and up and running. And thank you to the caterer, Natalie, and her team for setting up refreshments and manning the station. You are free to help yourself to some refreshments. It's been a long morning. And book sales, Francois says. And just to mingle and meet people and speak to people and share ideas. And thanks again to all the speakers for the input. And I just add a note which I forgot to mention to Dr. CLEOPHAS, Linus CLEOPHAS. Thank you for joining some of the family dots and bringing us back to that kind of authenticity and sharing the wonderful photos you did, which comes from your inner circle. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And thank you for attending again and braving the elements. And once again, congratulations to Francois.